Hello, I'm Karl Wells. My guest today is a remarkable woman, a remarkable Canadian. She has been a social activist her entire life. During her years as a nun, as a teacher, as a prominent person within social activist organizations, and as a politician, and as the leader of the New Democratic Party of Newfoundland and Labrador for almost 10 years. It's an honor to welcome Lorraine Michael to the program.
Well, Karl, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for those kind words.
Thank you. First of all, your grandparents moved to St. John's in 1910. You were born in St. John's. Now, your grandparents opened a small grocery store on New Gower Street, a part of New Gower Street that doesn't really exist anymore. I'm just wondering, when you were a little girl, was that store still operating, and do you have any memory of it at all?
Oh yes, it was definitely operating all the while I was a child, and I have lots of memories of the store. It was an important store for the Lebanese community because Pop brought in the ingredients for our food, and they used the wholesalers in Montreal for that. And my big memory is my grandmother's kitchen, which was behind the store, and it was the width of the building. And Siti was always cooking. Siti is Arabic for grandmother. Always cooking. And my memory is hot coals in her coal stove, and you'd come in and she would ask you, and I'm sure she asked me in Arabic, I'm positive, you know, did I want some laham mishwi? And laham mishwi was lamb over the coals, basically lamb shish kebab, you know, and she would just put it over the coals. What?
Kafta, is that what
well,
it's called?
kafta is another word.
Okay.
Lamb is laham, and mishwi is grilling the lamb.
Right.
And so it's the basis for shish kebab, and Siti would just immediately put it on, take some Arabic bread or flat bread, put it in, pass it over to you. The memory of her cooking always in that store, and how sad it was before she died young in 1956. For a year or two before she died, she wasn't well. She had high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. And they had to put a little kitchen upstairs on of the main living area for her. But she still kept on doing her cooking. So the store for me was seeing Pop behind the counter, but also Siti, and then Siti in the kitchen cooking, and the Lebanese community gathered around that store.
I find it totally fascinating that all those years ago, back in the 1950s, traditional Lebanese dishes were being prepared here in this city.
That's right.
It's amazing, because now when we think of you know, things like tabbouleh or hummus, you know, it's relatively a new thing. But to think, because I was going to ask you, you know, where did they get the ingredients way back then?
Well, you had wholesalers in Montreal. Some of the wholesalers there are the same families that started these wholesale businesses back at the turn of the 20th century. And it was a major international network. Lebanese were all over the world in the late 1800s and early 1900s. There was a large movement. So you'll find Lebanese no matter what country you go to in South America and Central America. One of the biggest retailers, food, etc., retailers in Mexico is Chedraui, which is from the same village my grandfather came from. The family's from the same village, and their competition is Costco. You know, it's in Mexico. Wow. They're all over the world. And so you did have the international chain of goods being sent from Lebanon all over the world.
Did your grandmother make kibbe?
Oh my gosh, yes, kibbe. I still make kibbe, right?
Oh, do you?
Oh yes, I cook Lebanese all the time.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, come to my house and I'll feed you Lebanese, Karl.
I think I may take you up on that.
I would be delighted. Oh yes, kibbe, tabbouleh, stuffed cabbage, stuffed grape leaves.
Oh.
Another dish called hamsa, which is well, I like bami. Bami is the Arabic for,
Yes.
bami.
Yeah.
So the Arabic for, I can always forget, okra.
Yeah.
And so bami with lamb and tomato, it's a beautiful dish. I'll feed you.
It sounds wonderful. So there was, apart from your grandparents' store, I mean, there was in the New Gower Street area, it was kind of a little Lebanese neighborhood, a vibrant Lebanese neighborhood. Can you just paint a picture for me of what that was like?
It was wonderful. I'll paint a visual picture that I try to get people to think of. Put your back to the Majestic Theatre, look down New Gower Street, and both north and south, all the way down, were mainly stores and businesses with people living above them. The Lebanese community from about Barter's Hill, the old Barter's Hill,
Right. Yeah.
westward, had about 20 different families represented in that area. And when the expropriation happened in the 1960s, when the city took over the north side, all those businesses died. My grandfather's business was still alive then. My Uncle Leo was running it. Pop was still alive. But all those businesses died, and the community was physically dispersed. And when I was a child, my parents never had to worry. I lived on Lamartin Road. If I was going down to City and Pops, they never had to worry about me and my two sisters and brother if we went down, because we'd go from there to my Aunt Mary's, and then we'd go to every Lebanese family along, say hello. I remember Mrs. Ringman. Eddie Ringman was a well-known photographer here, and his mother was Arabic, Lebanese. And Aunt Annie had a parrot, so we loved going in and watching her in her store with this parrot. Know, it was a whole community of people. It was a wonderful childhood, and that's how I identified. Really, was as Lebanese. And
sounds magical. Now, what's the size of the Lebanese community in this province these days?
I can't give you the exact numbers. It's in the hundreds, because you have 3 to 4 generations, not like my grandparents came in 1910. But I'm delighted to say that the Historic Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Heritage Society, is doing a project on the impact of the Lebanese coming in the turn of the 20th century, and I'm currently working with Dale Jarvis and their staff on that.
That's an excellent idea.
It is, and I don't think it's for me to give any dates or anything right now, but to say that we're really coming close to bringing this little piece of work together that I hope will lead to a lot more work recognizing the Lebanese in Newfoundland and Labrador, because we were all over the province.
Wonderful.
Yeah. My grandfather, for example, had a store in Fleur-de-Lis. He was a fish merchant as well, and had a store in Fleur-de-Lis.
Wow.
And when I went to teach in Bayvert in 1967, I got a message that a Mr. Walsh in Fleur-de-Lis wanted to meet me. He'd been the manager of my grandfather's store.
Let's talk about your education, your grade school years, and coming up through. Were you a happy student? Were you an enthusiastic student?
I was, and I was a successful student academically. I also studied music. Our family was very musical. My father and his brothers had an orchestra, and music, it was just jazz and big band music was in our family. And so music, was an important part, so not just my piano lessons, but choral work, etc. And I had wonderful friends. And when I think about school, I don't think about the academics, I think about my friends. Like my longest time friend, we've been friends since we're 5 years old, right? Since kindergarten. She was here 2 weeks ago, and we went over to Woody Point Writers Festival together. She doesn't live here. We still get together. you know, the friends that I was part of back then. And that's when I remember I went to Mercy on Military Road, where the gathering place is.
So you were taught by the nuns?
Yes, right. I was taught by the Sisters of Mercy. And although we did have some lay women, you know, along the way. And then Holy Heart. We went into Holy Heart in 1958 when I was in grade 10. So, and for me, that was really great because we went even more into music there because we had this wonderful choral room where we could have this wonderful choir. We had about 100 girls in our choir, I think, and you know, the whole expansion because of it having so many students in it. You know, they're my memories. It's not the academic; it's the context in which I went to school. I found it wonderful, actually.
In the meantime, did you have favorite subjects?
I didn't, you know.
No?
No,
Okay.
I did not. And that's sort of my personality. I have an eclectic personality when it comes to everything, I think. You know, like music. I love all music.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, I love jazz, absolutely love jazz. I love classical. But every aspect of music does something different for me. I love our traditional music. So I'm very eclectic, and I think that's the way I was in my education as well. I did well in most of my subjects. I liked studying, you know, etc. Yeah.
Now, at what point in your life did you decide that you wanted to become a nun? And what was going through your mind at that time?
This is an embarrassing question for me because I was in grade 11 and everybody was sort of talking about what they were going to do, and I kept saying I didn't know what I was going to do. And one day, in a time of being quiet, I actually went to the basilica and was quiet and just sitting and reflecting and said to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do. And self said back to me, oh yes you do, just like that. And I went home. My mother was in the kitchen cooking, and I stood by her. I said, Mommy, I think I'm going to enter the convent. And she looked at me and she said, are you surprised? It was like that. And I wanted to help people. I wanted to work with people. I didn't think about the profession I would do, and that's really true. I got a shock when I realized, oh, they're asking me to apply for a bursary because I'm going to be a teacher at Memorial. You know, we can get bursaries then. What was important for me was working with people and helping people. And I couldn't put it in any other way. And I suppose in 1960, the choices for a woman wanting to do that weren't great. So it wasn't that I wanted to do it as a nurse or I wanted to do it as a teacher. I just had this sense of I wanted to help people.
Yeah, amazing. And so you taught pretty much all over the island. You taught in Belle Island, you taught in Baie Verte, you taught on the Burin Peninsula, the Codroy Valley, right. St. John's. Right. What are your memories of that experience?
It was wonderful, especially, well, with Belle Island, that was my very first time. I was there for 1 year. And we were still pretty traditional then, you know, in the Roman Catholic Church and as religious. So my year there was mainly with everything that had to do with the school. But I was also a music teacher. So I mean, I put on concerts and all that kind of thing. The involvement with the community was always through the school. But once I got out of St. John's and started teaching in the smaller communities, my whole desire was to be out in the community. And of course, things had changed in our religious life by then. So I became very involved in the community life, and certainly in Baie Verte and in the Codroy Valley, and also in the short stints I had on the Burin Peninsula. I think it was extremely important for me, and I think also for the community to have us out there you know, in all kinds of ways, everything from things that related to school to ice fishing on a Sunday afternoon with a couple of grade 11 students, you know, in Bay Verde in particular, or going up, you know, actually experiencing, not doing moose hunting, but going up into the mountains in the Cadroy Valley during moose season, again with some of the students. And so when I came back to St. John's in 1971 to teach, I think all of that really impacted who I was, and then how I developed. And by 1972-73, I was part of the group here in St. John's who started the St. John's Oxfam Committee. And that group, while we were interested in the global issues of justice and the global issues of development, it was focused for us in how that was spelling out in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we began looking at the fishery and the impact of the fish, of the history of what brought us to where we were and what could happen to the fishery. And I think all of that in me had been informed by my rural experience, but also by this thing that was in me about working with people and being with people and believing in justice.
Yes, I was going to ask, I mean, did you see or not see things in rural Newfoundland that fueled your commitment to social and economic justice in the women's movement? I guess it did.
I think it did. It did it in a way that was subconscious, but very clear at the same time. So in Bay Verde, to see the distinction between the workers and the workers' families who lived in poor housing down by the water and the management houses that were up on the hill.
Yeah.
Even that, living in the midst of that, impacted. I was very, very aware of that distinction. I was always aware. I had the experience of a student in Bay Verde calling me a townie snob.
Really?
And it was based on the fact that he was asking me a question and I couldn't understand what he was saying. And a student who was seated by me, whose family was originally from St. John's, after I had to say to him twice, I'm not sure what you're asking me. And she sort of quietly...
This is because of his dialect.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And she quietly said to me what he was saying. And when I answered his question, he said, "I don't want to hear you now, townie snob," and sat down. And so that kind of experience, that wasn't... I didn't feel that as negative towards him. It was, oh, wow, I need to think about this, why I'm thought about that way. And one of the things that happened to me in the 1980s when I was the director of the Office of Social Action for the Archdiocese, we were working with people out in the Argentia area with regard to Hibernia. And we had an Argentia Action Committee. And after 2 or 3 years of my working with them, one night when we were all sitting around after a meeting just having a beer together, I don't know how it happened, but something about my being from St. John's being a townie. And one of the men in the group said, "You're a townie?" I said, "Well, surely, Ambrose, you know that?" He said, "No, my dear, I never knew you were." And I thought, I've made it. That was somebody from Placentia did not realize I was a townie.
Wow.
So I said, I've been impacted.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, for sure. Do you think that women's role in the Newfoundland and Labrador economy and in the labor market has improved significantly or sufficiently in the past 30 or 40 years?
It certainly hasn't improved sufficiently because, as in other places, not just here, women still are the highest percentage when it comes to the lower paying positions. And while we've had women who, have become doctors, have become lawyers, have become politicians, number one, it's certainly not a large percentage of women. And number two, the inequality between women and men is growing, and the inequality even in the women's community is there as well, as long as women are the lowest paid. And I remember that my analysis of that goes way back, and once back in the 1980s when we were celebrating International Women's Day, I won't name the person, but a woman who was a politician was upset with me because I spoke at it, and I said that as long as I was bringing dinner on a Sunday afternoon to a woman downtown St. John's because she was hungry, it didn't matter how many women politicians we had or how many women doctors or how many women anything, we did not have equality. And she got really upset with me. She did not understand that analysis, but that analysis still stands. And so in that sense, I don't think we're really further ahead. I think issues are out there more, but we're still not ahead in that from that analysis, which I still hold strongly.
So when you got involved in the movement, did you find that the issues that were of concern to women in Newfoundland and Labrador were the same as those concerning women in the rest of Canada or in the United Kingdom or in the United States, or were they different?
No, they weren't different. They were the same everywhere. And I think that's part of the strength of the women's movement, is that recognition. And in the 90s in particular, the work I did, I wasn't here in Newfoundland then in the 90s, and I was no longer in the order, but the work I did was even more national and international than what I had done before. So it gave me the opportunities to go to the UN and to see the role of women and the women's movement in the UN and the particular work that was being done. I was in Zimbabwe, for example, when the first march against women's violence, for violence against women took place. I have pictures of that. And so connecting with women in Africa over issues of violence against women was really important for me, and also in Latin America, and throughout, beginning in the 80s for me, and then throughout the 90s, connecting with people in Latin America because of the free trade agreements and the impact on women, particularly of economic development, was an essential part of my work. And it still is, in terms of me, and I still have those connections. The issues are the same. People don't like jargon, but we are based on patriarchal societies where men ruled. And all the dynamics are there no matter what country you're in. In poorer countries, it's worse because of the economic inequality of that country itself, not just of people in the country,
Are young people today committed to social and economic justice and feminism?
Yes, but what are the numbers? I don't know. I think that they express it differently, perhaps, than when I was in my 20s. It's certainly here in the city we have a lot of young people who are, and I shouldn't just say the city, I think in our province, but we have a lot of young people who are concerned from a social justice perspective. I'm looking at, even in the recent provincial election, obviously I'm a member of the NDP, so I will speak from my party's perspective. I was really quite impressed with the young people who ran and who contacted us. I was the chair of our search committee for candidates, and I was really excited by the young people who contacted and said they were interested in running. And young people from different experiences, transgendered people, more than one member of the LGBTQ plus community, people of different racial backgrounds, indigenous people wanting to run. So yes, I think it is there, and I think they're looking for their way in today's society to express it. I know there's a lot that happens through social media, and I have to admit that while I have a Facebook page, I don't follow all Facebook. I do follow Twitter a fair bit. So I think it's there, but I also think it's evolving in terms of where it's going to be. You know, I sometimes think, well, I'm not going to be here in 25 years' time. I wonder what it's going to be like by then, you know. But the desire for change in youth, I do sense change from a perspective of equality and justice, yes.
You left the church in the early 90s. That must have been an upsetting time for you. Can you talk about the decision you made then?
Basically, I burned out. I literally had a breakdown. And that was after 10 years of being a director of the Social Action Commission of the Archdiocese. And while we did fantastic work, it was wonderful work we did, there was always internal opposition, especially from the clergy. And I think the burnout happened because of what went on in 89 and 90 with regard to the abuse against boys, both in Mount Cashel as well as young people within the diocese. And I think it got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore. I literally had a breakdown, you know. And when I came out of that after 2 years of therapy, etc., then I knew I could never continue doing work in the Roman Catholic Church. Could never do that.
How is your faith now?
I don't identify with the Roman Catholic Church. I don't identify with any religion in particular. I think there are things in Christianity that I believe, but there are also things in other religions that I believe as well. So religion, using that term for me doesn't have meaning anymore. I remember the day my therapist said to me, after almost 2 years, he knew when to ask it, "So, are you still a social justice activist?" And my whole body rose up. And I said, "Of course I am," right? And I guess that's my religion. I believe in the struggle for justice. I believe in equality. And I want to die believing that and acting like that, knowing that I'm probably never going to see it. I don't know if we'll ever see it. I think it's part of the human condition. And I want to be part of the human condition that says, I want to fight for justice and equality.
Well, I hope you do. I hope you're able to for many, many years to come.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for this conversation, Lorraine. It's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Well, you know what? It's been good for me saying these things publicly, so thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome. And that's it for this version of Karl Wells Point to Point. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again next time.